A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
Greg Bondar is the national spokesperson for Christian Voice Australia. His other hat is the leader of Every Home for Christ in Australia. Greg, a special welcome back to 2020.
Oh, delighted to be back, Neil. Thank you for the invitation.
Well, Greg, I've had a long political connected career. And, of course, now with Every Home for Christ involved very, very heavily in mission work. But let's come to just drawing on some of your well of wisdom around election wins and losses. Let's start with why you might think the coalition lost the election on Saturday.
Yeah, thank you, Neil. Look, let me speak as Christian Voice Australia because, quite frankly, Neil, I've been analysing, I've been looking, I've been, navel gazing, and and I've come up with a couple of ideas for you that you need to look at. And the first thing I want to mention, Neil, is that you will have commentators galore and what they think. But from my point of view, this is the worst result since 1943, Neil. And it's even worse than the Whitlam era of 1975. And I have to tell you, Neil, I actually voted Labor in 1975. Young and foolish, I know, but I voted Labor in 1975. And
just to say, Labor was somewhat different in 1975 than it is today. Yes.
Yeah, and I remember the campaign slogan. It was called "It's Time, Neil." I don't know if you remember that, but that was the campaign. I actually voted Labor. I was a young university student, which is interesting because one of the things that Labor did this time was, again, address the young university target. But look, the other thing I want to mention, Neil, very quickly is that, that whether we like it or not, Neil, and I said this when Trump got elected, the people have spoken, Neil. They have spoken, and we need to respect that. Whether you're Labor, Liberal, or whether you're Greens or whatever, the people have spoken, Neil.
The people have spoken. The coalition lost. Some people were saying that Peter Dutton was too scary. Not assertive enough. There's a lot of people who are looking at Peter Dutton and his looks and his personality to blame for all of this, and even the idea of being advised to soften his image in the days leading up to the election. Lots of people are saying, well, he should have actually had a much more conservative or classical conservative agenda that might have actually attracted a more classically conservative voter population. Constituency. Hey, let's talk, though, about why you think Labor won. I mean, it's one thing to say it's all about Peter Dutton. It's not all about Peter Dutton. What about Albo? Why did Labor win?
Yeah. Oh, we'll get to that, Neil, but let me just go back to the coalition, why they lost. Now, talking about, look, I've got a great face for radio, Neil, as you know, and
you and I together.
But look, if you look at the coalition very quickly, Neil, and I've been there and I know, and I've spoken to colleagues, I've spoken to insiders, here are some reasons why the coalition lost. One, there's no two ways about it. The campaign was undermined internally by factions of the Liberal Party. Full stop. Fact. Two, there were leaks and internal betrayals galore, Neil, within the Liberal Party. Three, one of the things you have to understand that the coalition has moved too far to the left. So voters are saying, well, if the coalition's moved to the left, I may as well vote Labor. The other issues, and these are the three that I want to try and mention, there were no real economic policies from the coalition, and they were released too late for people to consider. Then I think you've got to understand that the focus on the Teals alienated a lot of the Conservative voters. And finally, I think, and this was in the Australian Financial Review, which I agree with, that the coalition tended to target the wider, poorer Australians in the fringe regions of Australia and not the capital city. So there's some reasons, Neil, why the coalition lost. And I'm sure you'll agree with some of those.
And no doubt there'll be a lot of, internalising with all sorts of critiques coming from every sector on the Conservative side of politics. Meanwhile, on the other side, on the Labor side, there's still sort of a very lightness and a dancing in the street. They won the election. What do you put down for Albo and his Labor team as to what they did right?
Yeah. Neil, and I've got to admit it, and I've admitted this, and I do declare that I'm a conservative voter, a Christian conservative voter. No two ways about it. As I said, I have voted Labor back in 1975. But that aside, Neil, why did Labor win? Here are my thoughts. I think, again, they started to target the renters, the mortgage holders. And quite frankly, that hits me as well, Neil. I've got a bit of a mortgage. So I took notice. They targeted young voters, university education people, about the HEC scheme. You've heard about that. So that's a big issue. They targeted middle-income earners. And in particular, they targeted immigration background people, Middle East or whatever it might be. But, Neil, here's interesting, and I feel this was a dirty campaign from the point of view that Labor insisted on having fear and personalities dominate their campaign. For example, Peter Dutton was demonised. He was attacked. And this is a classic case, Neil, of playing the man, not the ball. And unfortunately, the voters fell in for that and got sucked in, so to speak. And finally, they kept going on with Medicare. It comes up in every election, and people really, really relate to Medicare. So, Neil, for those reasons, Labor won. But what I can't understand is they've increased their majority, and I guess they clawed back a lot from the Greens or the Teals or whatever. So there are some reasons for you, Neil.
Playing the man, not the ball. We'd like to think, I guess, that there are some rules that each side might actually adhere to. But, some of those rules are so grey and they're not really written down in any black and white form. So those rules are there to be broken, aren't they? So when it comes to insults, playing the man, not the ball, playing the member, not the policy, those sorts of things, they're up for grabs when an election campaign's on.
Absolutely, Neil. You and I both know all is fair in love and war and politics.
All right.
And that's one of the things that people seem to forget. But yeah, quite frankly, it's open warfare.
Okay, let's talk where Christians think about a future by way of political thinking, political aspiration even, where the way forward, because, it doesn't appear to be that any of the parties with any Christian foundations actually got up in any way. Where there was some hope that there might be a family first, member in the Senate, but that hasn't happened. Where to from here for Australian Christian constituents?
Yeah, look, Neil, I've got a couple of comments here. One is maybe I should have stood for Parliament and, they'd have somebody in their Parliament. But, I get a lot of people encouraging me to do that. But look, Neil, all jokes aside, here are the issues that Christians need to understand, in particular Christian organisations. One is that morals and values do not win elections, Neil. They do not win elections. So every organisation that I looked at that was Christian, okay, they had voting guides. And what did the voting guide say? Abortion, pornography, euthanasia, censorship. Neil, these are not issues for a federal election. They are issues on a bill-by-bill case. In other words, when a bill comes into Parliament, you then lobby on these issues because, quite frankly, you can't win an election, Christian organisations going forward and arguing about abortion or pornography. Yeah, they are very important to me, Neil, but they're not going to win an election. So Christians need to now refocus on how they're going to lobby at a time when there's a federal election. I'm not talking about issues that are based on a legislation. I'm talking about issues that affect the whole economy. And unfortunately, every Christian organisation fell into that trap, Neil.
This thought that both sides somehow or other did have some agreement that they wouldn't talk about culture war issues. That's all those issues you were naming there. That's all the things that's really, a lot of Christians will say that's what's taking our nation down the gurgler, and our politicians are refusing to even acknowledge that those issues exist. They'll continue to legislate their ideological position on all of those culture war issues, but they won't allow them to be debated. That's challenging.
And that's the point I'm making, Neil, that if you've got organisations, national Christian organisations, that continue to say, this is how you should vote, make sure that the candidate knows about abortion, pornography, euthanasia. Neil, they are not going to win a federal election. They are meant to be for an individual legislation lobbying. And see, one of the things you've got to understand is perhaps people didn't buy enough of my book on how to vote. That's probably the other reason the coalition lost, Neil. By the way, they are available and they did sell like hotcakes. Neil, I want to make the point, where there is no vision, the people perish. Proverbs 29:18. And unfortunately, our Christian organisations fail to have a vision in terms of voting and engaging in the federal elections, Neil.
Okay, let's just move on, because you're making a suggestion, or at least asking the question, does Australia need a religious freedom ambassador? And this is something that they do have in the United States. You think we should have one here in Australia? How would that look?
Oh, Neil, absolutely. And I'm going to be writing to the Prime Minister. I hope he reads my letter. But one of the things I'm going to be suggesting, Neil, is that we actually look at a religious freedom ambassador. Now, what is a religious freedom ambassador, Neil? Quite frankly, it tends to be a representative who's been appointed to promote and advocate for religious freedom from a domestic and international point of view, engaging with government, religious leaders, stakeholders, because you see, Neil, worldwide, there's a lot of Christian persecution, not to mention domestically as well, from a different perspective. So we really need somebody that can stand up for it, because neither party has embraced the religious discrimination bill, Neil. So we're really looking for some way to get our voice heard.
So you'd be suggesting that Albo and his Labor government could actually become champions of religious freedom if they, in fact, had a religious freedom ambassador. I mean, some might argue that there's a lot on the Labor side who've been doing all they can to reduce religious freedom, and religious freedom's under threat. There's some challenges in there, but as a human rights issue, it doesn't matter what political persuasion you might have. If you had a human rights focus, that might come into being one of those things that you could do, something in a practical way.
Absolutely, Neil. In America, as I said, there is the International Religious Freedom Act of 1998. And one of the things we have to understand, Neil, that religious expression is still the foundation of human rights. So what I'm suggesting is that, okay, if you're not going to have a religious discrimination bill, let's appoint a religious, a religious freedom ambassador, somebody that can speak up for those that want to live out their faith in a political economy such as Australia.
Here's a little something from out of the side. Wouldn't it be a wise thing if the church denominations combined together and created their own religious freedom ambassador that, they don't have to actually ask for whatever government to endorse it? Couldn't the churches do that? Or do you think the churches are even divided over it?
Neil, one word, hallelujah, if we could do that, because that's exactly what the churches ought to be doing, uniting together as one voice. And I have been arguing this many times in my writings, in my media releases, that one of the things we've got is that the church is divided. And a house divided will fall, Neil. And that's a biblical perspective. So we've got to make sure that the churches do unite and put aside theological differences, but put forward a Christian biblical worldview.
Interesting, isn't it, that if you, no matter what you think of Donald Trump and the way that he is leading in the United States, he certainly has captured something of the Christian heartland of the United States that's drawn in behind him. And so he sees religious faith as a human rights issue, and and having this sort of ambassador situation for the United States, all of a sudden he's become a defender of Christian faith.
Yeah.
It's a little bit, you make the appointments, all of a sudden your image is that you are a defender of Christian faith. There's certainly political wisdom in that, isn't there?
Absolutely, Neil. And, Donald Trump epitomizes, as I said, play the game, not the man. Play the ball, not the man. In other words, you might like Donald Trump as a person, but have a look what he's doing. And he's doing what Christians and other conservative people worldwide agree with him. So look, I've got to say that, as I said, in his first 100 days, which was only a few weeks ago, Neil, he's done more for a biblical worldview on Christianity than all the lobbying organisations that I know of, Neil.
That's right. And you mentioned their International Religious Freedom Act. And so in US federal law, that's prioritising religious freedom for the US, but it also shapes their foreign policy. And that might mean that you might have Donald Trump or his ambassador speaking into our religious freedom arrangements. Do you think that is a possibility?
Yeah, look, Neil, you make a good point there, because you see, if I put my other hat on, which is a non-political organisation, Every Home for Christ, we go overseas and we provide humanitarian aid and we provide all sorts of aid to ensure that Christians are not persecuted. And unfortunately, they are persecuted. And here's Donald Trump that said, okay, I'm going to make sure that this religious freedom ambassador makes the voice of Christians heard worldwide, and there is some pressure to be had there. So look, really, Neil, what a great effort by Donald Trump in that regard. As I said, play the game, play the ball, not the man. And I think in that regard, religious having a religious freedom ambassador makes a lot of sense for Australia.
And you know what, we could wait until there is some level of political appointment. Just coming back to my left field consideration there, that maybe the churches need to get together and have their own religious freedom ambassador, because in terms of religious freedom, we think about Christian religious freedom. But some might be thinking, if there was a political appointment, in some ways there would be another way to interpret what religion means in all sorts of ways, and that might be contrary to our Christian ideals. So there is really something on the Christian churches to get together and do something as so far as a religious freedom ambassador.
And you make the point, Neil, that that's got to be done before it's too late, because it can be a two-edged sword. But you're spot on, and I totally agree with you, Neil.
Well, Greg, always appreciate your insights. Greg is the national spokesperson for Christian Voice Australia, christianvoiceaustralia.com.au to connect there. He's wearing his daytime hat on other occasions, and occasionally we talk to him about the good initiatives of Every Home for Christ in Australia. It's a global organisation. Greg leads the Australian outfit, everyhomeforchrist.org.au to connect with Greg on that level. Greg, thanks so much for more great insights today on 2020.
Thank you, Neil, and God bless you, my friend.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.